That kind of structure should not be there. The ILS antennae, it's where they normally are. But they shouldn't be embedded in something as hard as that. That is awful. That is unbelievably awful.
On December 29, 2024, the world watched in horror as the Jeju Air Flight 2216 engulfed in flames and met a tragic end. Termed as the deadliest aviation disaster in South Korea, the tragedy has puzzled the entire world. Jeju Air officials are saying it was a bird strike that caused the accident. Some believe it may be due to technical failures mid-flight. At the same time, many are certain that it was the localizer that sealed the fate of the 179 people. It could be months and even years until we get to know the full story behind the crash. The flight took off from Suvarnabhumi International Airport, Bangkok. The aircraft was Boeing 737-800, which is hailed as the safest passenger jet around the world. But that couldn't guarantee the safe arrival of passengers on board Flight 2216 at Muan International Airport, South Korea. Eyewitnesses of the accident described the horrifying moments as the plane descended. In the viral footage, the jet can be seen zooming on the runway without its landing gear deployed. Sparks flew as the aircraft's belly scraped the surface, but the worst came when the jet collided with a concrete beam and exploded into pieces. Another viral footage captured harrowing scenes of thick black smoke and frantic rescue attempts by first responders. All in all, South Korea was shaken to its core. Rescue teams were forced to identify victims with their fingerprints, and every name announced meant a devastated family. Only 2 survivors were found who were seated at the back of the plane. To understand what happened in the last minutes before the crash, let's take a look at the journey of Flight 2216. But before going any further, hit that subscribe button so you can stay updated about the latest developments regarding this tragedy. Now back to the timeline of the events. The plane took off from Suvarnabhumi International Airport, Bangkok at 2:28 a.m. 175 passengers and 6 crew members were aboard the jet. Among them was a 3-year-old boy traveling with 9 family members and 13 government officials returning from their Christmas vacation. None of them knew that these would be their final hours. The Boeing 737-800 had been pushed to its limits in the previous 48 hours. Records show it had made 13 flights, stopping at multiple destinations including Muan, Jeju Island, Beijing, Bangkok, and Taipei. Maintenance checks were squeezed into the minimum required 28-minute windows between flights. At 8:54 a.m., the plane was given permission to land at the Muan International Airport in South Korea. The weather was clear, with visibility extending to 9 kilometers, perfect conditions for landing, or so it seemed. At 8:57 a.m., air control warned the pilots about a possible bird strike. A minute later, the pilots issued a Mayday alert. Now, this is an interesting and crucial point, because the air control can't locate a single or even 2 birds from that far. Experts are suggesting that it must have been a flock that caused the air control to issue a bird strike warning, a warning that proved prophetic in the most tragic way possible. But here's where the story takes a disturbing turn. Muan International Airport has the highest rate of bird strikes among all airports in South Korea. Environmental impact assessments recommended the deployment of sound cannons, lasers, and warning lights. However, these safety measures were delayed due to runway extension work. At 9 a.m., the pilots attempted an emergency landing but were forced to go around again. Why? Because the landing gear wasn't deployed. A minute later, they were authorized to land from the opposite direction. A passenger texted their friend and talked about the bird strike. They also joked and said, "Should I leave my last 2 words?" Professor Kim In-gyu from the Korea Aerospace University Flight Education Center raises a critical point. It's extremely unusual for all 3 landing gears to fail simultaneously, even with one engine compromised by a bird strike. The second engine should have provided enough power to lower the landing gear. This hints towards a more complex chain of events than initially reported. Some experts are even suggesting that the pilots might have switched off the unaffected engine instead of the damaged one. The aircraft's desperate final approach was captured in horrifying detail by a local restaurant owner. His 54-second video shows the Boeing 737 attempting what aviation experts call the last resort, a belly landing. The aircraft touched down between 9:03 a.m. to 9:07 a.m. at a speed far above normal landing velocity. This sent sparks flying as metal met concrete. Multiple system failure is suspected as the landing gear wasn't down, the flaps weren't deployed, the reverse thrusters weren't working, and the undercarriage was also not lowered. All these things help in slowing down the jet and are powered by the hydraulic system. The most controversial aspect of this tragedy lay just beyond the runway's end. A 4-meter-high concrete barrier housing navigation equipment stood there in the path of the sliding aircraft.
That kind of structure should not be there. The ILS antennae, it's where they normally are. But they shouldn't be embedded in something as hard as that. That is awful. That is unbelievably awful.
Unlike other major airports where such equipment is mounted on collapsible structures, Muan's localizer was placed on a raised concrete embankment, a decision that aviation experts would later call unbelievably awful. The response was immediate, but the devastation was already complete. 1,562 personnel, including firefighters, military personnel, and police officers, rushed to the scene. The fire was extinguished within 43 minutes, but the toll was catastrophic. 179 lives were lost, with only 2 flight attendants surviving. In the days following the crash, the impact rippled through South Korean society. The government declared Muan a special disaster zone and announced a period of national mourning until January 5, 2025. Families of victims united in their grief, refusing to hold funerals until all bodies were identified. DNA testing became necessary for identifying many of the victims, a process that would take days. The investigation now has become an international effort. Teams from the U.S. National Transportation Safety Board, Federal Aviation Administration, and Boeing have joined South Korean authorities. They face a challenging task. The flight data recorder was found partially damaged. This tragedy has forced a hard look at aviation safety standards in South Korea. All Boeing 737-800 aircraft in the country are undergoing emergency inspections. The positioning of navigation equipment at airports nationwide is being reviewed. But perhaps most significantly, questions are being raised about the balance between commercial pressures and safety margins in the airline industry. The Jeju Air Flight 2216 disaster serves as a stark reminder that in aviation, there is no such thing as a small oversight. As South Korea mourns its losses and investigators piece together the final moments of Flight 2216, one question remains: could this tragedy have been prevented? For the families of the 179 victims, these investigations offer little comfort. Their lives have been forever altered by the events of December 29, 2024. What do you think caused the loss of lives? The pilots, the bird strike, or the improperly built localizer? Let us know in the comments below.